Pascal Saint Amans είναι ο αρχιτέκτονας του ελάχιστου εταιρικού φόρου στις εταιρείες κολοσσούς της παγκόσμιας οικονομίας. Είναι ο άνθρωπος που εργάστηκε επί 15 χρόνια ως επικεφαλής φορολογικής πολιτικής στον Οργανισμό Οικονομικής Συνεργασίας και Ανάπτυξης, ώστε οι πολυεθνικές να μην αποφελούνται από τους φορολογικούς παραδείσους και οι τράπεζες να μην κρύβουν την περιουσία των πελατών τους. Σήμερα εργάζεται ως σύμβουλος επιχειρήσεων και οργανισμών αλλά και κυβερνήσεων σε θέματα φορολογικής πολιτικής και πιστεύει ότι η επόμενη μεγάλη πρόκληση για την παγκόσμια οικονομία θα είναι η φορολόγηση του άνθρακα. Στην Ελλάδα βρέθηκε για το 20ο φορολογικό φόρουμ που οργάνωσε το Ελληνοαμερικανικό Επιμελητήριο και συζητήσαμε για το πώς διαμορφώνεται το παγκόσμιο φορολογικό τοπίο, για το επίπεδο φορολόγησης στην Ελλάδα και την πρόοδο που έχει συντελεστεί στην καταπολέμηση της φοροδιαφυγής.
Mr. Pascal Saint Amans, thank you for this interview to Euronews Greek. You led the tax division of OECD for about 15 years, and the most important legacy of your work are the so-called Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 of the global tax rate. To put it in simple terms, this means that big corporations with high profits should pay a minimum tax rate of 15% and not be able to hide their profits. 2 years from that historic multilateral agreement, it seems that it's quite challenging to actually put in force this agreement. Do you think it will ever happen, actually?
So indeed, in 2021, there were 140 countries agreeing that large multinational companies should no longer be able to put their profit in low-tax countries. It was decided that below 15%, 1.5, it was not acceptable. There was an agreement, and today this agreement is in force. And all the multinational companies in the world will be subject to that minimum tax. You may say, but the US is not implementing, China is not implementing, but the way it was designed is such as US companies and Chinese companies will be subject in Europe to that minimum tax. So yes, it worked, it was a success. There is one thing in the agreement which is not implemented is how to tax digital companies, you know, Apple, Google, and the likes. There was a part of the reform to say they should be taxed in a country even where they are not physically present, and this part has not been implemented, so we'll see what happens. But fundamentally, there is now a floor to tax competition, and this floor is at 15%.
Do you approve of the proposal to have a digital service tax? Do you think it might work for you?
So as I've just said, the part of the deal which was about taxing digital companies and very large companies at large is not implemented. So countries like Greece can be frustrated because they see a lot of profit derived from Greece. The advertisement is booked, the revenue is booked in Ireland, and Greece cannot tax. So what can you do? You could do a digital service tax, which means that you tax the transaction. But if you do that, you may be in trouble with the next president of the US, whether it's Madam Harris or Mr. Trump. So here, I think Europe should work harder and find a way to tax digital companies without a trade war with the US. We'll see what happens in the coming weeks.
And talking about the US, taxation is in the heart of the electoral campaign. Both candidates promise tax cuts. Do you think this will help the American economy? And is this the way to go for Europe too?
Well, unlike Greece, the US can print dollars, right? So they can have whatever debt they want. For the time being, the financial markets are fine. So they are not very responsible from a fiscal perspective. Trump did a reform in 2017 with a lot of tax cuts for the rich, and these tax cuts come to an end in 26. So we'll see what happens, whether Trump is elected or Madam Harris. But the US at some point will have to collect more taxes. They do not have VAT. They rely heavily on direct taxation, like corporate income tax or personal income tax. The rich are not taxed there. So there is an issue with the tax policy in the US, but they have no pressure from the financial market, unlike some other countries.
So what about Europe? What should Europe do? Should try to lower its taxes in general, or should it keep it at the rates they currently are?
In Europe, you have very different rates. From Ireland, where you have 25% of tax to the GDP, to France, the French, you can hear I'm French, we are the world champion in taxation. It's almost 50% of the GDP which goes through taxation. So Europe is diverse here. Globally still, Europe has a pretty high level of tax to GDP, but the real question is what for? What society do you want to fund? What do you want to socialize in the society? And I think Europe has a pretty strong social model which justifies pretty high taxes.
And Greece in particular has one of the highest tax to GDP ratios among the OECD countries. How does this impact the Greek economy?
So Greece, indeed, I understand, is just above 40% of tax to GDP, which puts it above the OECD average. You have a large social economy. You were lagging behind for a long time with struggle to collect the taxes, with a lot of fraud and evasion, and we saw that resulting in the big financial crisis in the early 2010s, right? So Greece needs to keep the level of taxation while promoting investment, so that's a difficult balancing exercise, but still the fight against fraud, which has made a lot of progress, needs to be kept up if you want to sustain the economy financially in particular.
On that front, in Greece, tax evasion and tax avoidance are among the biggest challenges of the Greek economy. Are you happy with the progress the Greek state has made so far in combating these two phenomena? And would you propose any new measures, any new initiatives that could help in that direction?
So Greece, I think, has been through massive changes. I mean, I come to Greece every year as a tourist, like many French people. I can tell you 20 years ago, it was a pure cash economy. It's no longer the case. Almost anywhere you can pay only cash, you get receipts. And that's a big transformation. I think the tax administration, the tax commissioner, George Pitzilis, made a tremendous change, which was good for the economy. Because if some don't pay the taxes, some others will pay, and that's unfair. So getting the economy in the formal sector has been a huge task. I think it needs to go on. You shouldn't relax on that front. And now tax administrations have new ways of modernizing. That's what we call tax 3.0, tax administration 3.0, which is a way to embed compliance directly through applications and so. I know the tax administration in Greece is moving into that direction, like many other tax administrations, so that's a good trajectory.
And now the new trend in taxation is the carbon tax. You said in an interview that the climate crisis will be addressed by the ministers of finances and not the ministers of environment. What exactly do you mean? Do you see that carbon taxes are being becoming the norm in the future, becoming more frequent and higher? And how would that impact the final consumer and inflation, which is already high enough, I guess?
So many questions in your question, and all very good. So first, we have a climate crisis. So we need to address the climate crisis, one. Two, the climate crisis comes from too much carbon emission, right? So we need to reduce them. How do we reduce them? Well, by pricing them. So you need to put a price on carbon emission. What's the negative externality? What's the impact on the environment and on climate? And that means probably a charge of 100 euros per ton of carbon. And we also need the money to organize the climate transition, for the adaptation and for all the investments. We're talking about trillions. So when you put all that and you look at what's happening today, 60% of carbon emissions throughout the world, 60% are priced at zero. No price at all for carbon. The remaining 40% are taxed or priced at 5 euros per ton instead of 100 euros per ton. So when you see that, you can see the writing on the wall. The future is about putting a price. It can be through trading systems, it can be through taxes. The difficulty, however, and that's why it's not happened yet, is that carbon taxes are regressive. They hit the poor more than the rich, and therefore the people demonstrate in the street as soon as you try to invest to put them in place. So we need to square...
Is there a way around that?
Well, we need to square that circle, finding a way which could be progressivity of carbon taxation or shutting down some exemptions which are not justified. Aviation is one of them. International shipping. No, I'm talking in Greece, and that's a very sensitive topic, but the emission of international shipping, that's 4% of global emission, right? 4%.
What would you propose?
Africa is at 4%. You just put an end to the exemption and you tax the fuel. That's what needs to happen. Now, it may have an impact on remote islands in the Caribbean or on remote markets, but we need to move there, and I think it's...
Won't it have an impact on goods that are transferred through?
It will have an impact, an inflationary impact, indeed, which may be mitigated by subsidies or so. That's what the international...
Actually, the West deal with more inflation? I mean, it has been quite persistent. And
You're right. All that is about trade-offs. We want to reduce inflation, but inflation is going down now, right? But we also want to avoid what's happening. Look, I mean, latest was Spain with more than 100 deaths of something which is directly related to climate change. So we need to move to that transition, and this transition will not happen without some form of carbon taxation worldwide. At some point, the US will have to move there too. Many countries are moving. You have more than 60 emission trading systems now in place in the world. So that's the future in the next 10 years. That will be the big tax debate.
thank you very much.
Thank you.